Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Ramani, and it is Sunday night. And so, yeah, let's get to some succession here. So let's just start at the top, jump around a little bit. Scorpion opener. Can't be mad at that. I'm going to bore you now with a scorpion story because anyone who doesn't know this myth should. You know the myth of the scorpion, which I'd like to think this is why they put this in there, that there was once a scorpion standing on a riverbed, wanted to get to the other side, but couldn't swim. As all the different river birds and turtles and everything went by, the scorpion asked for a ride. And they're all like, no way, you're going to sting us. And he's like, no, I'm not. But they didn't believe him. Finally, the swan, beautiful swan, comes by. And the scorpion says, can I have a ride? And the swan says, no, you're going to bite me. And the scorpion says, why would I bite you? You are the king of all of the birds. You're the most beautiful one. Why would I possibly do that? You're so much smarter than these other birds anyhow. So just give me a ride. There's no point in me biting you because then I won't get to the other side. The swan sort of drank in all the compliments and thought, okay, the scorpion's right. Of course, the scorpion's not going to bite me as we get to the other side. And so they're going across the river and it's going fine. And the swan is taking the scorpion onto the other side of the river. And the scorpion gets ready to jump off the swan's back to the other riverbank and stings the scorpion, leaving him in agonizing pain. And the swan cries and says, why, scorpion? Why did you sting me? You said you wouldn't. And the scorpion looked at the swan and said, I'm a scorpion. It's what we do. Scorpion's always going to sting, never going to change. And that's the case with Shiv. I thought that was a I loved that moment because in a way it was almost to me a bit of a sort of a strange narcissism coronation on an apropos weekend for that, because Tom was in essence saying, I've got your number, but I still see you as a means to an end. And I still think he's besotted with her. But it also begs the question, who really is the scorpion here, right? I think Tom's got it, but he definitely doesn't have the malignancy the way Shiv does. And we're going to talk a little bit about Tom and Shiv because they were definitely the money shot in this episode. Keep in mind, folks, Logan isn't buried yet. This dude is sitting in a coffin somewhere, which apparently Connor now has a relationship with his father because his father is dead in a coffin that he seems to be visiting regularly, which I think sort of suits Connor fine because I think the extent of his relationship with his father was that his father absolutely didn't recognize him. And at least now his father can't call him names. But this guy's not buried. And in a way, he is still sort of pulling the strings on his children's lives. I really appreciated that early scene between Kendall and Rava. Again, another great narcissism scene. Kendall has so much grandiosity, and that grandiosity keeps getting pumped up, right? We saw that vulnerable side of Kendall for multiple seasons. Now we're seeing the grandiosity. Dad's not in the way. He has more power. I do have to say, and here's his child, obviously enduring the taunts that one would if their father, as Rava puts it, runs a racist news organization. But I love some of the things that Kendall says to Rava, his ex-wife, things like, you have no idea. I'm running things on 6 continents. I'm here to make the world safe, all for them. So you win the grandiose medal for this episode, Kendall. I mean, Kendall really does live in this sort of a lord of all dominion kind of mindset. And he brings it to so many of the things he says are just sort of these bizarre, grandiose statements. He kept doing that throughout the episode. And I did find it interesting as time was going on. And he was meeting with one of those Carl type people and the other guy in that closet. And they were talking about sort of, like Matsson's weaknesses are now beginning to emerge. And Kendall showed very clearly he was also willing to throw Roman under the bus. Kendall always fully intended to be the sole head of this. Again, that grandiosity popping up left and right. I have to say that, Shiv, it was interesting to watch Shiv kind of getting more and more pumped up and her malignant narcissism all the way through. So you saw Shiv kind of getting off when she was communicating with Lucas, the narcissistic Scandinavian guy, and believing that she had that totally under wraps and she was the one who was going to play her brothers the way they played her. And then she's sexting her almost ex-husband, but still kind of sex husband kind of thing. And so I think that all of that kind of is what gets her going, right? And of course, she was trying to sabotage her brothers. This family has taken triangulation and turned it into something that's almost unrecognizable. It has always been fascinating to watch Greg as sort of the grim reaper in all of this. Greg's an interesting one because he is so chameleon-like, right? So very classically narcissistic. I'm not giving Greg a free pass on the youth thing anymore. Greg is officially in the club. His Roy genetics have popped up, and he clearly is very narcissistic. But he's a chameleon, and what he's done, he's almost downregulated his own conscience to the point where he could do that Zoom, fire all the people. In Greg's case, the amount of degradation, humiliation, and dehumanization he's experienced at the hands of this family for so long, it's almost like a prisoner under sort of this completely degraded condition. And now he's become the monster because he's been looking at the monster so long. And so that's what we're seeing in Greg. And he really, again, you're seeing that grandiosity pop, but the ease with which, and almost the bragging he has around doing these inhumane things. Greg, again, I keep saying Greg's a little bit of a dark horse. We're going to see what happens next week. It's funny. He's part of course, what do you call them? The disgusting brothers, with him and Tom, and then referring, of course, to the dumpster brothers, Kendall and Roman. I have to say that, Lucas is it's sort of, the disruptor. Once again, they're having the so-called moment of silence for Logan, and Lucas walks in. Lucas is so incapable of reading social cues. He's definitely narcissistic, but at such a high level that it sometimes feels like he's in the sociopathic realm. That's sort of my read on Lucas. But it is, again, I do not trust him. Now, here's a sequence that I think a lot of you might have appreciated is Ebba, the assistant director of communications. Ebba looks like somebody who's being narcissistically abused. Everything about her face, her posture, her defeat, that definitely is what someone who's narcissistically abused looks like. And clearly she's enduring harassment and stalking, no surprise, from Lucas. So I found that just Ebba's entire persona was that of a narcissistically abused person. We don't tend to see those people as much on that show. That was very, very much there. Tom is turning out to be so sort of interesting to me because you're never quite sure that, the betrayal to keep the power. Does he love Shiv? Does he not? I really still think, and maybe the show made me this cynical, Tom has always loved the power that Shiv represented. I really do believe that. So now that they're sort of back in it, the power and the proximity, but he incurred a major narcissistic injury at that party when apparently these 40 powerful, whatever the heck they were, fancy people gathered in one room, and Shiv had no problem sort of working Lucas through the room and letting it drop that Tom was probably going to be fired. So Shiv will humiliate or degrade anyone to be able to get her way. That's always been Shiv. That's what I'm saying. Shiv is the most like Logan. She really is. Kendall tries, but he doesn't have the steely spine. Roman, poor guy, is too trauma bonded. And Connor, he's on some daddy pleasing mission. That's definitely not of Logan's kind of toxicity, but Shiv's got that toxic spine. Now, that interaction between Tom and Shiv was a phenomenal narcissism moment on Succession. What Tom was doing, interestingly, something I've told a lot of you to not do, which is never call the narcissist out. Now, he never called her a narcissist, but he used just about every word in the English language you could as the workaround to make the point that he thought she was narcissistic. But not surprisingly, Shiv gives as good as she gets. But some of my favorite lines, and I have to read them because I have to make notes of them. Tom said, you're a tough B word who will survive. Oh, you're a tough effing B word who will survive because you will do what you need to survive. Narcissistic. You can be a selfish person and find it hard to think about me. No empathy. Your sense of self is that thin, that fragility. You are incapable of love. True. Then Tom hits back again with, it's not my fault that you didn't get your father's approval. And then he goes on to say to her, I've given you endless approval and it doesn't fill you up because you were broken. he really captures the psychology of Shiv here, and it's absolutely right. Now, how does Shiv respond? Two ways. One is she gaslights him full on. She says, I didn't tell people you're getting fired. Yes, you did. And we all saw it. And so that definitely was a gaslight move. And then she says, I don't care. Now, Tom's not a sympathetic figure. This is when you go narcissist on narcissist, it becomes interesting. It's like two T-Rexes fighting. You're not really rooting against or for either of them. One of them's going down. And so you don't really care. But what Tom did, I don't care what happens to Tom. And but Tom betrayed her, right? And I think when Tom betrayed her was the first time she not only, yes, she felt betrayed, but I think that made him attractive to her. Now her punishment is to make him weak, of course, but in this kind of narcissist on narcissist violence, Tom doesn't have a chance. Shiv is operating at a whole heavy Logan-esque level, but that whole interchange and the way that he called her out, what did she do? She went for shame, shame, shame. His observations were actually not off point, which again, found that very, very interesting. There was a moment that I actually thought to be a really striking moment. And this is where I think that Jeremy Strong is such a really super great actor in this, because you see he captures those moments so well. Nate, so what's her name? Shiv's lover from way back early on, that presidential assistant person, comes to this get together. And Kendall's trying to play ball with him, you know, trying to sort of thwart the deal through all this regulatory stuff with people who are affiliated, you know, with government agencies. And what Nate turns to him, and Nate's boss is the presidential candidate, Gil, whatever the hell Gil's last name is. And obviously Logan is Kendall's father. And Nate hits him with, I'm not Gil, you're not Logan. And that's a good thing. I found that to be such an interesting line, because it really, really does at this point in the show feel like children who are trying to play narcissism and psychopathy dress up. Shiv is as close as we get to someone who can actually play that game. And Lucas obviously is this new character who's able to somewhat play it too. But Kendall and Roman really aren't able to. And clearly neither is this Nate guy, nor are a lot of these other people that in this sort of old guard of people like Logan, who could play this game better than anyone in that absolute absence of conscience. Kendall's still trying to please the unpleasable father. Roman is still deeply attached to his father. Look at him wanting to do the eulogy at the funeral. And so that's what they're in the shadow of. Logan was trying to prove something very different to the world, whether it was what happened to his, you know, his own difficult childhood, but it wasn't to win someone over. It really was sort of to maybe avenge the world in and of itself, because he grew up under such dire circumstances. But it was for the kids who remain, the boys at least, to get their father to notice him. Shiv, again, whole different game. And so I found that I find that entire experience quite interesting. You know, as we go into next week, which I believe is the last week, which is interesting to me because it feels like there's so much more story left to tell. You know, Lucas and his posturing, right? I don't like Lucas. I have to tell you, I dislike Lucas so much that I like Roman and Kendall. Like if somebody made me choose, you had to be locked up for 5 years with some of these people, he would be the last one on the list. I'd even choose Shiv before him. I cannot stand Lucas. That sort of, again, it's that kind of techie, postury, I know something you don't know, I have contempt for human beings, AI is going to take over the world, kind of Burning Man, I don't wear shoes persona. Don't like it. So I really am, it is my hope, kind of my hope that, you know, definitely my hope that Lucas goes down. I would actually rather see Kendall run this entire enterprise than Lucas get away with anything. And who knows, I still hold out that Greg may be the dark horse and may end up more on top of any of this than any of us could imagine. I have no idea what's going to happen next week, which is what makes next week so great. But them's my thoughts. I mean, again, what you're seeing is, like I said, all the kids are playing narcissism and psychopathy dress up. It's not the same as when the old timers did it. And you can see the cracks are showing. And Shiv try to play her father's game because she is like her father, but she's still not able to do it. It'll be interesting to see if she gets burned. So them's my thoughts on this week. Next week, Mother's Day. What a Mother's Day gift to immerse myself And I think it's a 90-minute episode of nothing but narcissism. So it'll be fascinating to see how this story ends. Like most narcissism stories, I can tell you, probably not well. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you enjoyed this take, and I'll see you next week. Thanks again.